They mocked me for sitting alone on Christmas Eve. The next morning, every credit card was canceled, and I was already gone. The evening had begun with all the usual decorations and smells of a holiday I once loved. The house glowed with garlands twisted around the staircase, fairy lights twinkling along the mantel, and the dining room shimmering with candles that Rachel insisted were modern and tasteful. Their scent was strong, vanilla mixed with something synthetic, but no one seemed to notice except me. I noticed everything that night because I was invisible enough to have time to notice. The turkey was set in the center of the polished mahogany table, steam rising from its golden skin, bowls of stuffing, mashed potatoes dripping with butter, green beans tossed with almonds. It looked perfect, the kind of meal you'd see on the cover of a magazine. My hands itched to reach forward, to take the carving knife as I had every year, but the knife was already in Rachel's hand. She carved too quickly, uneven slices falling onto plates, and smiled like she'd conquered some throne. I sat at the far end of the table, where no one passed dishes my way unless I asked twice. My plate stayed half empty. I pretended to sip water as they raised their wine glasses. The clinking of crystal echoed around the room, and Rachel leaned in close to her sister, stage whispering in a voice pitched just loud enough for me to hear. Maybe Margaret would be more comfortable at the kids' table in the kitchen. At least then she'd fit somewhere. Her words cut deeper than the sharpest knife. The table erupted in laughter, loud and mean. My stepson nearly spat out his drink, his face red with delight. David's laugh was softer, more nervous, but it was there. And Thomas, my husband of 23 years, chuckled, covering it with a cough like it was nothing. Like I was nothing. I pressed my hands together under the table, my nails biting into my palms. The heat rushed up my neck, but I refused to break. I lifted my glass of water, forced a small smile, and whispered, "Merry Christmas." No one noticed. Or maybe they did and didn't care. The rest of the meal passed in fragments. Rachel bragged about the new spa she wanted to try in the spring. David laughed about a coworker's mistake at school. Thomas told a joke about accountants and holiday bonuses. They spoke over me, around me, through me, as though my chair were empty. Every so often, Rachel's eyes flicked toward me, amused, satisfied, as if watching me sink gave her more flavor than the turkey she devoured. When dessert came, apple pie from a bakery, not mine, Rachel announced cheerfully, "We didn't want to trouble Margaret with baking this year. She forgets recipes anyway." Another round of laughter. I clenched my jaw so tightly it hurt. I used to bake pies from scratch every Christmas. Apple with cinnamon, pecan with maple syrup, pumpkin with whipped cream. David used to hover by the oven, begging for a slice before it cooled. He never once asked this year. When the table finally cleared, everyone moved to the living room. They huddled by the fire, exchanging gifts and laughter. I stayed behind in the kitchen. I loaded plates into the dishwasher, rinsed glasses, wiped counters, every motion mechanical. The sound of their laughter drifted in from the other room. It was muffled but constant, like a cruel soundtrack. As I worked, I thought about everything I had given this family. My inheritance had paid for this house when Thomas's business faltered. My careful savings had covered David's college tuition. I had quietly written the check for Rachel and David's down payment when their loan was denied. Every vacation, every comfort, every luxury, they had my fingerprints all over them. And still, I was the one mocked for being old-fashioned, the one excluded from inside jokes, the one banished to silence. When the dishwasher hummed to life, I leaned against the counter, gripping its edge until my knuckles went white. My chest tightened with the ache of loneliness, but beneath it, something darker pulsed, something sharper. Anger. It didn't burst like fireworks. It settled cold and steady in my chest like steel being forged. Hours later, the house fell quiet. Footsteps padded upstairs, doors closed, voices lowered. I remained by the Christmas tree, its lights blinking faintly in the dark. The stockings hung neatly above the fireplace, one for David, one for Rachel, one for Thomas. Not one for me. Not even a token. That was when I saw it. Thomas's brown leather briefcase tucked under his chair. A corner of paper jutted out. My hands trembled as I reached for it, sliding the papers free. Receipts, boarding passes, Madrid, January 5th. 3 tickets. Thomas, David, Rachel. Not me. The air left my lungs. My knees weakened, but I forced myself into Thomas's chair, gripping the papers tighter. I read them again and again, hoping my name would appear if I stared hard enough. But it wasn't there. It had never been there. Rachel's words whispered, back to me. Only the ones who really matter. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. The hushed conversations at Thanksgiving, the eraser marks on the family calendar, Thomas's vague, I'll be busy with meetings that week. The satisfied smirk Rachel wore when she said some families knew how to prioritize. They hadn't forgotten me. They had erased me. I slid the papers back into the briefcase, careful not to leave them out of place. My eyes roamed the study, books we once read together, photos of vacations I paid for, awards from his firm where I once worked beside him. Every object carried a memory of us. And suddenly, it all felt like a museum of betrayal, gaslighting. That's what it was. Rachel's pitying tone. Margaret, you seem so tired. Maybe you should get one of those medical alert buttons, just in case. Thomas correcting me gently in front of guests. Don't mind her. She mixes things up sometimes. David's silence, letting Rachel speak for him. Every moment tiny, but strung together. They formed a noose. A story where I was weak, fading, unnecessary. My chest ached, but no tears came. Not anymore. Tears would mean they had won. I sat in that chair until the first light of dawn spilled through the curtains. I wasn't the same woman who had sat at the end of the table the night before. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't fading. I was angry. And I was ready. At 7 in the morning, I picked up the phone and dialed the bank. First National. How can I help you? A bright voice answered. This is Margaret Lewis, I said calmly. I need to review every account in my name, and I want immediate changes to all access and passwords. The representative hesitated before launching into the standard security checks. Dates, numbers, codes. I answered each one quickly, my voice steady, unshaking. By the time the call ended, joint accounts were frozen, passwords reset, and every credit card canceled. By noon, Thomas's wallet would be full of useless plastic. Rachel's shopping sprees would crash. David's safety net would vanish. I wasn't done. I called Patricia, our lawyer. She answered groggily. Patricia, it's Margaret. I need an appointment tomorrow morning. Urgent. Alone. Don't let Thomas get there before me. She sighed. Margaret, it's Christmas. Then the day after. 9 sharp. There was a pause. Then resignation. All right. Day after tomorrow. I hung up. My eyes scanned the kitchen. The wreath on the wall Rachel had chosen. The stockings filled, but not for me. The pile of gifts under the tree with none bearing my name. Every detail screamed what they'd been trying to tell me. I didn't matter, but I did. More than they realized. I opened the suitcase in the closet. Clothes, documents, jewelry, my mother's necklace, the one she pressed into my hand on her deathbed. My movements were precise, my hands no longer trembling. When Thomas finally stumbled down the stairs, bleary-eyed, holding his phone with confusion plastered on his face, I was already at the door. Margaret, he said, scratching his head. There's some problem with the cards. None of them are working. The bank says, I cut him off with a smile. A real one this time. Merry Christmas, Thomas. And I walked out. I didn't look back. I don't even remember how I drove to that motel. My body did the motions. Steering wheel turning beneath my palms, tires humming against icy asphalt. But my mind was stuck at that dining table, still hearing Rachel's smirk woven into words, still seeing Thomas lower his gaze as if shame were a stranger to him, still catching the silence in David's eyes where my son's defense should have been. When the car finally jolted to a stop, I blinked and realized I was parked beneath a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an angry insect. Vacancy glowed in tired red letters, half burned out. A stray snowflake landed on my windshield, slid down, and vanished into the blur of salt and grime already smeared across the glass. I sat there for a long moment, engine idling, heater humming faint warmth against my legs. I could have turned around, driven home, pretended it was all some misunderstanding. But that word, family, echoed in my head, warped and poisoned. Rachel had weaponized it. Only the ones who really matter. My husband, my son, my daughter-in-law. And apparently, not me. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence roared. The motel lobby smelled like damp carpet masked poorly with chemical air freshener. A tiny bell sat on the counter, though the clerk was already watching me from behind thick glasses. He barely looked up from his crossword puzzle when I gave my name. "One night?" he asked, already reaching for the key card. "1 week," I said. My voice startled even me, clipped, firm, like a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, even if I didn't. His eyes flicked up, lingered a moment on my face, then he nodded and slid the key across. Room 14, end of the hall. The hallway was dim, the lights buzzing faintly above me. My suitcase wheels thumped across uneven tiles until I reached the door. The key beeped green, the lock clicked, and I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Stale air freshener mixed with mildew, like someone had sprayed perfume over something rotting. The curtains hung limp. Their floral print faded to pastel ghosts. The carpet was so worn that the original color was a mystery. The bed sagged in the middle like a defeated man's shoulders. I dropped my suitcase beside it, sat on the edge, and stared at the wall. The heater rattled to life, spitting out air that smelled faintly of dust. For the first time all evening, I was alone. Alone with my humiliation. Alone with my rage. I closed my eyes and replayed Rachel's words. Maybe Margaret would be more comfortable at the kids' table. Laughter had followed. Soft, conspiratorial. Thomas had chuckled. David hadn't said a word. It wasn't just the insult. It was the indifference. The way they dismissed me like I was furniture, like I was a ghost sitting among them. My chest ached. I pressed my fists into my eyes until sparks of color burst behind my lids. How did I get here? How did the woman who built this family, who signed every check and smoothed every crisis, end up invisible in her own home? My gaze fell to my hands. They trembled slightly, but there was strength in them still. Wrinkles lined the skin, veins pressed against the surface, but they were capable hands. These were the hands that sewed David's Halloween costumes when we couldn't afford store-bought. The hands that typed for 12 hours at the firm while Thomas snored in the den. The hands that signed the mortgage, balanced the checkbook, built the life we all enjoyed. And those hands were not done yet. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Rachel again. Only the ones who really matter. The words burrowed into me, sharp as glass. At 2 a.m, I gave up. I shuffled across the carpet and brewed coffee in the tiny pot. The smell was bitter and metallic, and the taste even worse, scorched cardboard. But it kept me awake. I stood at the window, mug cradled between my palms, watching snow swirl under the streetlight. Each flake landed, melted instantly, gone without a trace. I thought about last Christmas. How I'd wrapped gifts late into the night, labeling each one with careful loops of my handwriting. How David had hugged me then, genuinely, thanking me for the sweater I knitted. How Thomas had raised a toast at dinner, calling me the glue that keeps this family together. Where had that man gone? Where had my son gone? The ache in my chest twisted into something darker, something colder. By sunrise, grief had hardened into resolve. Harold's office sat above a bakery on Main Street. The smell of warm bread and sugar clung to the stairwell as I climbed, clutching my handbag tight. My heels clicked against worn carpet, a rhythm steadier than my pulse. The receptionist greeted me too brightly, her holiday sweater patterned with reindeer. "Mrs. Lewis, what a surprise! Mary, is Harold in?" I cut her off, sharper than I intended. Her smile faltered and she nodded quickly, ushering me down the hall. When Harold looked up from his desk, he blinked like he was seeing a ghost. His glasses slipped down his nose and he scrambled to his feet. "Margaret, I'd expect. What brings you here? It's the holidays." "Sit," I said. My voice was steel. He did. I laid Thomas's receipts on his desk. Boarding passes. Crumpled, but damning. 3 weeks ago, Thomas came to see you. He asked about moving assets, about putting David on accounts, about painting me as incompetent. Harold's face drained. Of color. His mouth opened, then shut. He fiddled with his pen, the click loud in the silence. Finally, he stammered, "Margaret, it's not unusual for—" "Don't." The words snapped like ice breaking. "Don't you dare soften this." He was laying a trap and you know it. The wall clock ticked, each sound stretching seconds into accusations. At last, Harold sighed, shoulders sagging. "Yes." He asked about power of attorney, about restructuring if your memory slipped. I let out a bitter laugh. Slipped. That's what they've been whispering for months. Forgetful, confused. I thought maybe they were right. But no. They were setting the stage. Harold flinched, guilt pooling in his eyes. I leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. You'll restructure everything. Every account. Every beneficiary. Every password. And from now on, Harold, you deal only with me. Do you understand? He nodded quickly. For the next 2 hours, we combed through accounts. Numbers filled the air. Savings, retirement, investments, certificates of deposit. Each digit hammered reality deeper. 70% of our wealth was in my name. My parents' inheritance, my decades of work, my discipline. Not Thomas's, not Rachel's, not David's, mine. When I left Harold's office, snow crunched beneath my boots. The bakery's windows glowed warm behind me, but I didn't stop. My steps were heavier now, yes, but they were certain. For the first time in years, I felt control. When I stepped out of Harold's office, my chest felt both lighter and heavier. Because it was no longer hidden, heavier because now it rested squarely on me. The cold air bit my cheeks as I walked back to my car, but I welcomed it. It cleared the fog from my head. The bank sat only a few blocks away, a red brick building with wreaths in every frosted window. The glass doors reflected my face back at me, tired, pale, but sharpened. The woman staring back was not the Margaret they had mocked. Not anymore. Inside, warmth and faint pine filled the air. A Christmas tree stood near the entrance, strung with blinking lights. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering about candy canes, while an older man filled out a withdrawal slip at the counter. It all looked so normal, so oblivious. I walked to the clerk. He was young, maybe mid-20s, his tie crooked. He smiled automatically. "Mrs. Lewis, Merry Christmas. What can I help you with today?" "I want to close every joint account." "With Thomas Lewis," I said flatly. "Transfer all funds into accounts in my name only." His smile faltered. "Close? All? That's a significant step. Are you absolutely certain?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice, but sharpening it. "Do I look uncertain?" He swallowed. "No, ma'am. Of course. It's just, joint accounts usually require. My signature is here." I slid my ID and checkbook across the counter. My hand didn't tremble. "That's all you need." For a moment he stared, as if gauging whether I might crack. But I didn't. Half an hour later, it was done. The form signed, the balances shifted. The joint accounts, the lifeline Thomas had assumed was his, were gone. Pictured it then. Thomas at some Spanish cafe, Rachel giddy, David trying to impress her. The waiter sets down the bill. Thomas hands over his card. Declined. He tries another. Declined. Rachel's voice rises, shrill, cutting through the clatter of plates. The waiter shrugs, tapping the receipt. Thomas fumbles, his face flushing, while David stares down at his hands, silent as always. I didn't smile. But inside, something cold and steady bloomed. Back at the motel, the room smelled worse than before. Damp air freshener failing to disguise mildew. I ignored it. I spread papers across the bedspread, creating order out of chaos. Account balances, investment statements, inheritance documents, mortgage records. It looked like a war map. And maybe that's what it was. Each sheet told a story. David's college, tuition, my money, Rachel's SUV, my signature, the down payment on their house, my inheritance. Even the firm Thomas bragged about retiring from comfortably, funded by years of me covering expenses quietly while he spent freely. They had convinced themselves it was theirs. But this map proved otherwise. I ran my fingers across the pages, like tracing scars. Memories surfaced with each number. Thanksgiving just weeks ago. Rachel smirking across the table, saying, "Some families know how to prioritize what really matters." Thomas had chuckled. David had stared into his mashed potatoes. I thought it was a passing comment. Now I knew it was a rehearsal. October. I'd been planning our 40th anniversary dinner. Excited, hopeful. Rachel had given me that pitying smile. "Oh, Margaret, Tom and I already talked about this. He thinks a quiet evening at home would be better for you. All that excitement might be too much." Tom? She'd called him Tom. My stomach had twisted then, but I'd ignored it. I told myself maybe Thomas had mentioned something to her. Maybe I was overreacting. September. Rachel suggesting I get a medical alert system. You never know at Your age. Her voice syrupy, her eyes sharp, Thomas backing her up. You've seemed forgetful lately, dear. I had laughed it off, though the sting lingered. One by one, the pieces clicked into place. It wasn't random. It was a campaign. A careful to paint me weak, fragile, forgetful, to prepare me to be erased. I stared at the papers, until the ink blurred. My reflection in the motel mirror looked back at me. Lined face, tired eyes, but burning with something new. If they thought they could erase me, they were about to learn I was the one holding the pen. The following morning, I drove to Patricia Williams's office. Patricia had handled our estate planning years ago, a sharp woman with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her receptionist led me in. Patricia rose from her leather chair, eyebrows lifted. Margaret, this is unexpected. The holidays. I dropped the folder on her desk. The papers spilled, spreading across the wood. What Thomas has been doing isn't unexpected. It's deliberate. It's financial abuse. Her gaze swept over the documents, her lips tightening. Power of attorney drafts, discussions about competency, asset transfers. She looked up, her eyes sharper now. He's been laying groundwork. Yes, I said. My voice cracked, but I pressed forward. And I'm laying mine. Patricia leaned back, folding her hands. The good news is that most of this is in your name. Legally, you're on solid ground. If Thomas tried to prove incompetency, he'd need evaluations, court hearings, extensive evidence. It would be difficult. Then let's make it impossible, I said. Arrange for a cognitive evaluation. Independent. I want proof on record that I'm perfectly competent. Her eyebrows rose slightly. That's smart, preemptive. I leaned closer, my voice low but hard. And, Patricia, if Thomas or Rachel tries to move so much as a dime without me, I want you ready. I don't care if it's New Year's Eve. You call me. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Patricia nodded slowly, something like respect, flickering in her eyes. When I stepped outside, the sky had cleared. Snow glittered under a weak winter sun, turning sidewalks into mirrors of light. I stopped there, breathing in crisp air, the papers clutched tight in my hands. For decades, I'd been the quiet one, the fixer, the one who made things smooth, easy, comfortable for everyone else. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. But now the silence was broken. I wasn't their afterthought anymore. I was their reckoning. Back at the motel, evening shadows had already stretched long across the parking lot. The neon sign outside buzzed, painting the curtains in pulses of red. I sat at the small desk, papers spread like a deck of cards across the surface. Bank slips, account balances, investment statements, all the quiet, invisible backbone of a life built piece by piece. I stared at them until my eyes blurred. Numbers danced. 6 zeros here, 4 zeros there. But beyond the math, each page held memories. The $40,000 deposit into David's college fund. I remembered working overtime shifts at the firm, too exhausted to cook, but proud because that money meant my son wouldn't struggle like I did. The withdrawal for Thomas's so-called business trip 10 years ago, the one that turned out to be a golf vacation. I had laughed it off then, because that's what I always did. Forgave, patched, smoothed. I picked up a photo from my bag, a picture of David as a boy, standing with frosting smeared across his cheek on his 10th birthday. I traced his little face with my finger. That boy would never have left me behind. That boy would never have sat silent while his wife dismissed me like trash. Somewhere between that photo and Spain, I had lost him. Or maybe, I thought grimly, maybe he had chosen to lose me. The heater rattled, filling the silence with its uneven hum. Outside, snow tapped gently against the window. I poured myself another cup of motel coffee, bitter and metallic, and sat back down. I began making lists. Not grocery lists, not holiday lists, not the kind of lists I had spent decades writing for everyone else. These were mine. What I control. House deed, in my name. Retirement accounts. Parents' inheritance. Insurance policies. Investment portfolios. What they think they control. Me. A slow, humorless smile tugged at my lips. I underlined the last line twice. For years, I let them write the narrative. Doting wife, selfless mother, background character in their play. But tonight, under the dim lamp of a cheap motel, I was rewriting it. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, memories attacked me. I saw Thanksgiving again. Rachel's sly smile as she carved the turkey, her voice smooth as she said, "Some families know how to prioritize what matters." I saw Thomas laugh. I saw David look away. At the time, I told myself it was harmless. But replaying it now, I heard the venom dripping between the words. I saw October, me talking, about our anniversary dinner. Rachel cutting me off. "Oh, Margaret, Tom and I already talked about this. He thinks a quiet evening at home would be better for you." Tom. The intimacy of it sickened me now. I saw September. Rachel's pitying glance. "Maybe you should consider a medical alert system. You never know at your age." Thomas had chimed in with that gentle, patronizing smile. "You've seemed forgetful lately, dear." Scene after scene flashed, stitched together now in a pattern I had been too blind to see. They hadn't just excluded me from a Christmas. They had been rehearsing my disappearance for months, and I had let them. I sat up, unable to stay in bed. I turned on the lamp, grabbed a notebook from my purse, and began to write. Rules from now on. No assumptions. If I don't see it, it isn't true. No blind trust. Trust is earned, not owed. My money, my name, my control. They will learn that I matter. My handwriting carved hard grooves into the paper, letters jagged and dark. My hand cramped, but I didn't stop until the list felt final. I set the notebook down and looked at myself in the mirror above the dresser. My face looked older than it had yesterday, creases deeper, eyes shadowed. But beneath that, there was steel. For decades, I thought love meant sacrifice. That to hold a family together, I had to give pieces of myself until nothing was left. But tonight, staring into my own eyes, I realized love without respect is just servitude. And I was done serving. The next morning, I drove back to the bank. Not because I needed to, everything was already in my name, but because I wanted to see it, to feel it. The marble floors echoed under my boots as I walked to the mortgage department. The officer pulled up my records, tapping on her keyboard. "Yes, Mrs. Lewis. The final mortgage payments came directly from your inheritance fund. Saved you thousands in interest. My inheritance. My money. My decision." I walked out into the crisp air, head high. For once, the world didn't feel heavy on my shoulders. It felt wide, open, waiting. That night, in the motel, I imagined their faces. Thomas, trying to charm his way past a Spanish waiter when the credit cards declined. Rachel, outrage sharpening her words into knives, shrieking about mistakes. David, quiet, ashamed, but complicit all the same. I imagined their return, suitcases dragging through our front door. Rachel's practiced smile cracking when she realized the locks had been changed. Thomas fumbling, demanding explanations. David looking at me with eyes that begged but no longer commanded. And I imagined myself standing there, calm, steady. For once, not the pleading wife or the forgiving mother. For once, not the invisible one. The one holding the power. The one rewriting the story. The one they'd underestimated. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. Because I knew this was only the beginning. The sound of tires crunching over gravel pulled me from my thoughts. I stood at the kitchen window, mug of coffee cooling in my hands, and watched headlights sweep across the driveway. A familiar silhouette, our old SUV, slid to a stop. The clock above the stove read 6:14 a.m. They were home. I didn't move. Not at first. I simply stood there, letting the moment expand, letting the weight of it settle into my bones. For days, I had imagined this. Thomas fumbling with keys, Rachel storming through the door, David silent behind them. For days, I had rehearsed what I would say, what I would not say. But now that the moment had arrived, there was only stillness inside me. The front door rattled. The lock clicked once, twice, then stopped. A muffled curse, another rattle. The locks had been changed. I sipped my coffee, savoring the bitter taste. From the hallway came hurried whispers. Rachel's sharp, Thomas's low, David's uncertain. The knock that followed rattled the door against its frame. "Margaret." Thomas's voice, pitched to sound calm. The voice of the man who had once sweet-talked clients, neighbors, me. "Margaret, open up. Let's be reasonable." Reasonable. The word struck like an insult. I set down my mug, walked to the door, and slid the new chain free. When I opened it, the winter air rushed in, sharp and biting. They looked exactly as I had imagined. Thomas's face flushed, his once pristine vacation clothes wrinkled. his shoulders stiff with forced composure. Rachel stood slightly behind him, eyes blazing, lips pressed thin. David lingered further back, suitcase handle clutched tight, his gaze flickering anywhere but at me. "Margaret," Thomas said again, forcing a smile. "Thank God. We've been trying to reach you. Something's happened with the bank?" "I know," I said. My voice was cool, steady. "It was me." His smile faltered. Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You can't just—" she started, but I raised a hand. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "If you're going to lie to me, at least do it sitting down." They hesitated, then filed in. The sound of their suitcases, bumping against the hardwood, echoed like an accusation. The kitchen felt colder with them inside it. Thomas tried to reclaim the space, setting his coat over the back of a chair, loosening his collar like he owned the air itself. Rachel crossed her arms, tapping her nails against her sleeve, each click sharp as a pin. David hovered near the doorway, unsure whether to sit or stand. I remained by the counter, arms folded. "Well?" I said. Thomas cleared his throat. "Margaret, this is a misunderstanding. Spain, it wasn't meant to exclude you. It was a father-son trip, last minute. Rachel only came because—" Rachel cut in, her voice dripping with sugar. "Because David wanted me there. Of course he did. I'm his wife, his family." She emphasized the last word like it was a blade. My jaw tightened. I looked at David. "Is that true?" He swallowed, eyes darting to Rachel, then to me. "Mom, it's complicated." "No," I snapped. "It's simple. Either you wanted me there or you didn't." Silence. He looked at the floor. The answer was clear. Rachel leaned forward, her smirk returning. "See? You're making this about you again, Margaret. We wanted some space. Families need boundaries. Families need honesty." I shot back. "Families don't gaslight each other for months, whispering about forgetfulness, about confusion. Families don't erase each other from holiday tables." Thomas raised his hands as if to calm the storm. "Margaret, no one erased you. You're overreacting." I reached into the folder I'd prepared and tossed a set of bank statements onto the table. The papers fanned out, balances highlighted in red ink. "Overreacting? These accounts were mine. 70% of our assets are in my name. My inheritance, my retirement, my money. Yet you were planning transfers. Power of attorney. Behind my back." His face drained of color. "I was just being prudent." "Prudent?" I barked aloud. "Prudent for who? For the woman you were trying to declare incompetent? Or for the son you've been secretly gifting my money to?" David's head snapped up, panic flashing across his face. "Mom, I didn't know." I cut him off. "That car in your driveway? Paid for with $20,000 you didn't even realize came from me. Because your father had me sign documents without explanation." Rachel's eyes glittered, though her smirk faltered. "It was a gift. You can't take back a gift." "Watch me," I said, my voice low, dangerous. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder. Thomas rubbed his forehead. "Margaret, listen. We've all made mistakes. Let's just sit down and—" "No," I interrupted. For 43 years, I sat down. I forgave. I smoothed over. I let myself become invisible in my own life. But not anymore. Rachel scoffed. "Invisible? Please. You've always been in the middle of everything. Every decision, every plan. Honestly, it's suffocating. You act like David is still your little boy instead of my husband." Her words sliced through the room. I turned slowly to David. "Is that how you feel?" His lips parted, closed again. His eyes flickered with conflict. Loyalty to me? Fear? Of her? Finally, he whispered, "Sometimes." The floor seemed to shift beneath me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then the ache hardened into steel. "I see," I said softly. Rachel pounced. "Exactly. You can't let go. That's why we didn't tell you about Spain. Because you would have ruined it. Ruined it." Words tasting like ash. "By existing? By expecting honesty?" She shrugged. "By making it about you." I walked to the counter, pulled another stack of papers from the folder, and dropped them onto the table. Mortgage records, utility bills, credit card statements. Everything you've enjoyed these past years, your house, your car, even that Spanish vacation, was paid for with my money. And you dare stand here and tell me I ruined things by wanting a seat at the table? Rachel's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Margaret, enough. This isn't healthy. I leaned across the table, my eyes boring into his. No, Thomas. What isn't healthy is a husband plotting to strip his wife of power while whispering lies about her mind. What isn't healthy is a son who takes and takes without asking why his mother is always the one paying. What isn't healthy is a daughter-in-law who mistakes cruelty for strength. The air in the room crackled. David shifted, rubbing the back of his neck. Rachel glared daggers. Thomas's shoulders slumped under the weight of truth. Finally, I straightened, gathering the papers back into their folder. I'm done being invisible. From now on, you want anything, respect, money, a relationship, you'll have to earn it. Silence swallowed the room. Then Rachel laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You think you can cut us off? We're family. You can't just erase us. I met her gaze, steady. Watch me. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Thomas rubbed his temples like he could massage away the truth. Rachel's chest heaved with indignation. David's face, my son's face, was pale, pinched, caught between shame and fury. Finally, Thomas spoke, voice cracking under its own weight. Margaret, for God's sake, we're a family. Families work things out. I met his eyes, calm as ice. Families don't erase each other. Rachel slammed her palm against the table, the sound making David flinch. This is insane. You're tearing us apart because of a trip. A trip. Her voice rose higher, shriller. You've always needed everything to orbit around you. Every holiday, every plan, every decision. Always about Margaret. Well, not anymore. We don't need your permission to live our lives. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but cutting. You needed my money, though, didn't you? Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. A muscle twitched in her jaw. David finally spoke, his voice raw. Mom, please, just stop. I turned to him, my heart cracking even as my anger held. Stop what? Stop fighting for the respect I've earned? Stop pointing out the lies you let fester? He shook his head violently, tears threatening. I can't do this. I can't choose between you. My throat tightened. You already did. Rachel's hand shot to his arm, gripping hard. Don't listen to her, David. She's trying to manipulate you. Just like always. The laugh that escaped me was sharp, humorless. Manipulate? I raised you, fed you, paid for your education, your wedding, your home. That isn't manipulation. That's sacrifice. And look what it bought me. A son too afraid to look his mother in the eye. David's composure cracked. You don't understand. You smother me. You've always smothered me. Rachel's right. You can't let go. That's why. He broke off, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. Rachel cooed, false sweetness dripping. See, Margaret? You've pushed him to this? You're toxic. I rounded on her, every word searing. No. What's toxic is how you've wormed your way into every corner of his life until he doesn't even know his own thoughts. What's toxic is how you've whispered about my memory, my mind, trying to erase me so you could stand taller in my absence. Rachel's smile curdled. You're pathetic, bitter, alone. I stepped closer, my voice steel. Alone, maybe. Pathetic? Never again. Thomas finally stood, slamming his fist onto the table. Enough. This house, this marriage, it's not yours to dictate. You can't just lock us out and cut us off like some tyrant. I straightened to my full height, folder clutched tight at my side. This house is in my name. This money is in my accounts. This marriage? You ended it when you chose deceit over honesty. Don't lecture me about tyranny when you tried to make me disappear in my own life. For the first time, his bravado faltered completely. His eyes darted to the folder, then back to me. He knew. He had already lost. The room pulsed with tension, each of us breathing hard, the air too thick to carry sound. Then Rachel sneered. You think you've won, don't you? You think because you have the money, you have the power. But money doesn't make family. When David has to choose, it won't be you. She reached for him, pulling him close, her eyes burning into mine. It will never be you. I held her gaze, steady, unflinching. We'll see. David tore his arm free, stumbling. Back. His eyes were wet, tortured. Stop it. Both of you. Just stop. He turned and bolted down the hallway, his footsteps echoing up the stairs. A door slammed. The sound reverberated through the house like a gunshot. The three of us left stood in the wreckage of silence. Thomas sagged against a chair, defeated. Rachel's chest rose and fell, fury barely contained. I stood tall, unyielding. Finally, Rachel hissed, low and venomous. You'll regret this. You don't know what we're capable of. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a whisper sharp enough to cut. Neither do you. That night, long after they had gone silent in the guest room, I sat in the kitchen alone. Papers spread before me. Coffee gone cold. Upstairs, the house groaned with the weight of broken trust. And then, just past midnight, my phone buzzed. An email notification. The subject line froze my blood. Urgent, power of attorney petition filed. Hearing scheduled. The screen blurred in my vision. Filed. Hearing. So this was their move. The war had only begun. The email glowed on my phone screen long after midnight, its subject line drilling into me like a blade. Urgent, petition for power of attorney. Hearing scheduled. I sat frozen at the motel desk, the dim lamp throwing tired shadows across the papers already spread before me. For hours, I'd been building lists, tracing the pathways of money, rewriting my life on lined notebook pages. But this was a declaration. My hands trembled as I scrolled. The petition had been filed in county court naming Thomas Lewis, my husband of 43 years, as the petitioner. Supporting affidavit attached. I clicked. My breath caught. There it was, in black and white. Claims of progressive memory decline, confusion regarding financial matters, inability to manage independent living. Words Rachel had been planting for months, now hardened into legal bullets aimed straight at me. And there, Thomas's signature. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles blanched, forcing myself not to cry. They hadn't just lied at Christmas. They hadn't just excluded me. They were trying to erase me entirely, legally, permanently. For several minutes, all I could hear was the motel heater rattling, the faint buzz of the neon sign outside. I stared at the petition until the words blurred. My husband, my son, my daughter-in-law. The three people I'd given everything to were standing together in court, arguing that I was no longer competent to live my own life. Something inside me broke, and then reformed, sharper than before. I picked up my phone and dialed Patricia Williams. It rang 4 times before her voicemail clicked on. You've reached Patricia Williams, family law attorney. Please leave a message. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. Patricia, it's Margaret Lewis. They've filed. Power of attorney. Court dates in 2 weeks. I need to see you first thing tomorrow. Please. This can't wait. I hung up and sank into the stiff motel chair. My reflection stared back from the dark window. Lines deeper, eyes rimmed with red. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. Steel. They think I'm disappearing, I whispered to the empty room. They have no idea who they're dealing with. By the time the gray light of dawn seeped into the room, I hadn't slept. My suitcase sat open on the bed, half-packed. I gathered my papers into folders, bank statements, investment portfolios, mortgage receipts, all carefully labeled. If they wanted a war of evidence, I would come armed. The courthouse was downtown, but Patricia's office was only 3 blocks away. I drove there just after 8, the city still sluggish from morning snow. Her building rose tall and narrow, glass catching the pale sun. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. Her receptionist looked up, startled. Mrs. Lewis, you're early. Tell Patricia it can't wait. My voice surprised me. Calm, commanding. Within minutes, Patricia opened her office door. Tall, sharp-featured, hair pinned in a perfect twist, she carried the authority of a woman used to high-stakes battles. Margaret, come in. Her office smelled of leather and ink. Law books lined the walls, neat rows of precedent and strategy. She gestured me into a chair opposite her polished desk. You said they filed? She asked, her tone already brisk. I slid the printout across to her. Late last night. Look. She scanned the pages, lips tightening. Progressive memory. Decline. Inability to manage finances. And here, Thomas Lewis, petitioner. Witness statement attached. I leaned forward. Witness? She tapped the second page. Rachel Lewis, your daughter-in-law. Of course. My chest burned. Patricia set the papers down, folding her hands. Margaret, listen to me carefully. These cases, power of attorney petitions, are serious, but they're not insurmountable. They need evidence, medical evaluations, patterns of incompetence. Without that, it's their word against yours. They've been laying groundwork for months, I said bitterly. Rachel dropping comments about my memory. Thomas agreeing. Thanksgiving, she practically announced it. They've been trying to gaslight me into doubting myself, Patricia nodded. Classic preparation. Create a narrative, then bring it to court. But they've underestimated you. You have assets, records, clarity. You've already taken steps to protect your finances. I slid another folder across. Bank, transfers, mortgage statements, proof that everything major is in my name. They can't touch most of it. Patricia flipped through the pages, eyebrows lifting. Excellent. This is exactly what we need. I leaned back, exhaustion weighing on me. I don't just want to defend myself, Patricia. I want to expose them. Every lie, every manipulation. I want the court to see exactly what they've been doing. Her lips curved slightly. Then we'll do more than defend. We'll counterattack. Strategy. For the next 2 hours, we worked through evidence like soldiers planning a campaign. Patricia took notes rapidly, tapping her pen against the desk. First, we'll schedule a neurocognitive evaluation, independent. That kills their claim of incompetence. Second, we'll subpoena financial records, yours and theirs. The $20,000 transfer to David? That's key. Shows deception. They tricked me into signing, I said. Thomas told me it was will paperwork. It was a gift transfer. Fraud by misrepresentation, Patricia confirmed. The court won't like that. I thought of Rachel's smug smile at Thanksgiving. Some families know how to prioritize what matters. My hand curled into a fist. What about witnesses? I asked. People who've seen I'm competent? Patricia nodded. Neighbors, colleagues, friends. Your sister, perhaps. Anyone who can testify you're managing your life perfectly well. Their whole argument hinges on perception. We counter with reality. I hesitated, then added quietly, What about David? Patricia's eyes softened. Your son? Yes. He's caught in the middle. He went along with them. But I don't think he fully understands what they're doing. If he realized... She tapped her pen thoughtfully. It's risky. He's already listed as benefiting from these transfers, but if he cracks under questioning, his testimony could destroy their case. A long silence stretched between us. My heart twisted. David, my only child. Could I really drag him into court, force him to choose? Patricia's voice was firm. Margaret, they've already chosen. They filed this petition. They're trying to erase you. The question now is, do you fight back or let them? My throat tightened. I met her gaze. I fight, she smiled. Good. Then let's prepare. Afternoon. By the time I left Patricia's office, the sun was high and the snow had melted into gray slush. But inside me, something solid had formed. A resolve. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was reclaiming my life. I stopped at a cafe across the street, ordering tea I barely tasted. Around me, strangers laughed, tapped on laptops, argued over meetings. Their lives looked so ordinary. I wondered how many of them carried invisible battles like mine. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should give up before. You embarrass yourself. Families don't air dirty laundry in court. No signature, but I knew the tone. Rachel. I deleted it without reply. Let her stew. Instead, I opened a blank page in my notebook. At the top, I wrote in bold letters, my story, and I began to write not just facts, but memories. The Christmas mornings I planned, the late nights working, the sacrifices no one saw, the truth they wanted buried. Because in court, evidence mattered. But so did story, and mine was stronger than theirs. As the words flowed, I felt lighter, stronger, more alive. Let them come. I was ready. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and cold air, that strange mixture of history and bureaucracy. As I stepped through the tall glass doors, my heels clicking against the marble, I felt the weight of every eye. People streamed in and out, lawyers in crisp suits, families whispering anxiously, bailiffs standing stern at every corner. To them, this was just another case, another day. But to me, it was the battlefield where my life would be decided. Patricia walked beside me, steady and unyielding in her navy blazer. She carried a leather case brimming with documents, her stride purposeful. "Remember," she murmured, low enough only I could hear. "Stay calm. Let me do the heavy lifting. Truth is on your side." I nodded, though my stomach churned. Courtroom. 3B loomed ahead, its oak doors tall and intimidating. As they creaked open, the sound echoed like a warning bell. Inside, the chamber was colder than I expected. Rows of benches, the judge's bench elevated, the flag in one corner. A place designed to strip away comfort, leaving only truth and law. And there they were. Thomas sat at the petitioner's table, hair combed neatly, suit pressed. He looked smaller somehow, though his posture tried to feign control. Rachel sat beside him, eyes sharp, mouth already curled in disdain. She wore a tailored dress, dark red, the color of calculated power. David was behind them, not at the table, but on the bench directly behind, close enough to show allegiance, far enough to avoid the spotlight. His shoulders were hunched, his hands twisted in his lap. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. His flickered with something, guilt, fear, before he looked away. Patricia touched my arm lightly. "Let's sit." We moved to our side, the respondent's table. I set down my folder, carefully arranging my notes, though. I knew Patricia had already memorized every detail. Across the aisle, Rachel leaned toward Thomas, whispering fiercely, her manicured nails tapping against his sleeve. He nodded, jaw tight. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." Everyone stood as the judge entered. A tall man in his 60s, silver hair, robe flowing as he took his seat. His gavel cracked once against the block. "Be seated." The shuffle of movement filled the room, then silence. Case number 24 CV 1862. Petition for power of attorney. Petitioner, Thomas Lewis. Respondent, Margaret Lewis. Hearing my own name pronounced like that, clinical, detached, sent a chill through me. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed." A man in a gray suit stood, Thomas's attorney. I didn't recognize him, but his smile was smooth, practiced. "Your Honor, this case concerns the well-being of Mrs. Margaret Lewis. The petitioner, her husband, seeks power of attorney due to clear evidence of her declining cognitive abilities and mismanagement of finances. We will present testimony from family members attesting to confusion, forgetfulness, and erratic decisions that put the household at risk." He gestured toward Thomas, who sat solemnly, hands folded like a man burdened by duty. My chest tightened. The performance had begun. The judge nodded. "You may call your first witness." Petitioner calls Rachel Lewis. Of course. Rachel rose gracefully, her heels sharp against the floor. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took the stand. The lawyer smiled at her like an old friend. "Mrs. Lewis, could you please describe your mother-in-law's recent behavior?" Rachel clasped her hands delicately, voice dripping with false concern. "Margaret has always been spirited, but in recent years we've noticed troubling changes. She forgets important dates, repeats questions, misplaces items. At Thanksgiving, for example, she accused us of hiding travel plans when really, she'd simply forgotten we'd told her." I gripped the table, nails digging into the wood. "Lies. Twisted fragments of truth. She's also made financial errors," Rachel continued smoothly, "signing documents without understanding them, becoming paranoid about money. At one point, she accused Thomas of stealing, which is simply heartbreaking after 43 years of marriage." Her eyes shone with manufactured pity. "We love her. We only want to protect her from herself." The lawyer nodded gravely. "Thank you, Mrs. Lewis." No further questions. The judge turned to Patricia. Cross-examination. Patricia rose, calm and precise. "Yes, Your Honor." She approached the stand, her heels clicking steadily, her eyes locked on Rachel's. "Mrs. Lewis, you testified that my client forgets things. Can you give an example of something significant?" "She's forgotten, beyond everyday lapses." Rachel hesitated just for a beat. "Well, she mixed up dates for Christmas. She thought she was invited when she wasn't." "Invited to what exactly?" Patricia asked, voice even. Rachel shifted. A trip to Spain. It was last minute. Patricia's eyebrow arched. Last minute? Yet records show flights were purchased 2 months in advance. Isn't it true you deliberately withheld those plans from her? Rachel's mouth opened, closed. We didn't need to travel. Did you ask her? Silence. Patricia leaned closer. Mrs. Lewis, isn't it true that instead of forgetting, my client was deliberately excluded? Rachel's eyes flickered, panic seeping through. That's not... She's difficult. No further questions, Patricia said smoothly, returning to our table. I exhaled slowly, pulse racing. The first crack in Rachel's armor. The judge looked to Thomas's lawyer. Next witness? Petitioner calls David Lewis. My heart lurched. David. He rose slowly, his steps heavy as he approached the stand. He swore the oath, sat down, eyes darting between me and his father. The lawyer smiled gently. David, you've known your mother all your life. Can you tell? The court, what changes you've noticed recently? David swallowed hard. She's been different, suspicious, to anger. Sometimes she thinks we're plotting against her. A knife through my chest. Would you say her memory has declined? He hesitated, glancing at Rachel. Sometimes. She forgets conversations, gets details wrong. Rachel's smirk returned. Triumphant. Thank you, David, the lawyer said. No further questions? The judge nodded toward Patricia. She rose slowly, walking toward the stand. Her voice was gentle, almost maternal. David, you love your mother, don't you? His eyes glistened. Of course. And you don't want to hurt her. No. Patricia nodded. David, you said your mother forgets things. Isn't it possible you sometimes allow others to speak for you? For example, your wife? His jaw tightened. Rachel just wants to help. Did your mother ever actually forget promises, or did Rachel tell you she did? He blinked rapidly, his breathing uneven. I don't know. Patricia's softened further. David, your mother raised you, paid for your education, supported your family. Do you believe she deserves respect? Tears welled in his eyes. He glanced at me, then quickly looked down. Yes, Patricia smiled gently. No further questions. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but I stayed still. I stayed. Battlefield 2. The afternoon dragged with more testimonies, Thomas himself taking the stand, painting me as fragile, confused, unstable. His voice trembled just enough to sound pained. His lawyer guided him like a puppeteer, spinning. A story of a loving husband forced into responsibility. But Patricia was relentless. She held up documents. Mortgage receipts signed by me, investment strategies in my handwriting, utility bills paid on time. She highlighted how 70% of our assets were solely mine. With each page, Thomas's facade slipped further. The time she sat down, he looked deflated, sweat beading at his brow. Finally, the judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. This case will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. I will review today's testimonies and evidence. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. Everyone rose. I gathered my papers with trembling hands. The room buzzed with whispers as people filed out. Rachel's glare burned holes into me. Thomas avoided my gaze. David lingered, caught between them and me, his face pale and drawn. As Patricia touched my arm, guiding me out, I heard Rachel hiss under her breath, just loud enough for me alone. You won today, but tomorrow we'll bury you. I turned, meeting her eyes with steady fire. Try. That night, in my motel room, I replayed every word, every crack in their testimony. Fear gnawed at me, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. I opened my notebook, writing at the top of the page. Tomorrow decides everything. As I set my pen down, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. From anonymous subject, evidence. You need my pulse quickened as I opened it. Attached was a single scanned page, handwritten, dated October. It was Thomas's handwriting. Rachel, make sure Margaret believes she's confused. If we can prove incompetence, the accounts will be ours. Destroy after reading. I stared. Breathless, heart pounding. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had left proof. Tomorrow, everything would change.